So my hot take is the product trio, the traditional trio of PM, design, engineering leader is not good enough anymore. And that what you need is what we call a square. And the square brings in someone from a field team, a customer facing team that spends all their time with the customer. PM is a role that is kind of like evolving. There's not enough time for the PM to be living their life next to the customer and bring 100% of the fidelity back into that planning process that they need from the customer.
Hello and welcome to another episode of One Night in Product, Hot Takes Edition, where I speak to one person about one thing, get straight to the point and find out what's on their mind. Now, if you've got something on your mind, why not head over to onenightinproduct.com/hot, where you can find a time, book a slot, we can have a chat and we can share your opinions with the world. In any case, do remember to head to onenightinproduct.com, where you can find all of our past episodes with thought leaders and practitioners, as well as links to the podcast and all of the podcast platforms, or find us and subscribe on YouTube and make sure you like, share, subscribe, and all of that good stuff that they do over there. Anyway, enough of me. Let's get straight to Adam Dille's hot take. So in front of me, I see an interesting wood-panelled scene with a juxtaposition of some neon behind and a nice, expensive microphone and a gentleman before me, who I'm going to stop waffling and just throw straight over to ask you to tell me what your name is, where you're based, what it is you do, and most importantly, what's your hot take?
All right. I'm Adam Dille. I lead engineering. I'm the SVP of Product Engineering at Quantum Metric. We are an experience analytics provider for some of the biggest, most recognizable brands in the world. And I know you're probably going to understand this because I've listened to you and I hear you come from a background of tech. You know, I started my career in engineering, and there's a kind of like a slice of engineering world that just cares about give me orders and I want to build something beautiful. And I was the other slice. So I was kind of like, why do I build this thing? You know, who is this for? What is the purpose of it? And I think that's led me into, you know, even though I'm a leader of an engineering team, I'm here talking on a product podcast. I go to product cons. I'm just always interested in the why behind what we do. I'm sure you are too. That's why you have a podcast like this. So my hot take is the product trio, the traditional trio of PM, design, engineering leader is not good enough anymore. And that what you need is what we call a square. And the square brings in someone from a field team, a customer facing team that spends all their time with the customer. Magic happens when that occurs. And I think the reason it's needed now more than ever is PM is a role that is kind of like evolving. We all know it's changed over the years. It's still changing. It's kind of trying to find its way. And within that role, it's turned into many things, not just like I spend all my time with the customer and I bring that back to the team, but there's elements of building a roadmap. There's trying to run execution and just stay on top of everything that's going on. And within that mess, there's not enough time for the PM to be living their life next to the customer and bring 100% of the fidelity back into that planning process that they need from the customer. So we found great success in bringing someone in who does fit that role. They spend all their days with the customer hearing about the problem on the ground. So that's my hot take.
All right, let's dig into that. So first of all, just a point of order, we're talking about a square.
Yep.
There's the implication that 2 points of that square aren't connected. So therefore they have to go through one of the other points. So I'm assuming that the square has a little diagonal line across it as well.
Yeah. I actually hadn't thought about that. It's maybe some kind of like 3D form in there.
Like
or
a tesseract or something like that. I don't know.
Someone said cube, and I'm like, cube implies I have 4 more points, on the other side. So
yeah, you don't want to get too many people in the party.
Yeah.
All right. So we got these, like the trio. So obviously everyone listening to this probably aware of the trio. So you've got your designer, you've got the product manager, you've got probably the engineering lead with a collection of engineers behind him or her. And then you've also got the now potentially like what you call a field person kind of connected to that as well. So just to clarify, when you're talking about a field person, you're talking about, for example, customer success, account management, operations teams, maybe even sales. Like, how far does your definition of field person stretch?
Yeah, it's the person who's actually spending their time with the product next to the customer. So we have taken some of the roles that you mentioned. We have varied them as well, depending on the effort. It might be better to have a pre-sales engineer, or it might be better to have a post-sales analyst. We call it business consultant. It just depends on the effort. What is the primary metric you're trying to move with a given effort?
But it's interesting because there's a lot of debate out there in the kind of internet, the social LinkedIn, whatever you want to call it, car crash carnage that it is these days. But there's a lot of people kind of debating, for example, like, well, there are many product managers that just don't get to go and speak to customers, especially in the B2B context, where some of the people that you've mentioned maybe kind of own that relationship, and rightly so in some kind of circumstances. But this idea that the biggest problem that's facing these trios is that, well, maybe it's not even a trio, like maybe they don't even have designers, which I've certainly seen myself as well. Or maybe there's some warfare between the designers and the product people, because the product people are now agitating to go and be do the voice of the customer stuff themselves, and then the designers or the user researchers and such are then kind of feeling under threat from that. So is it kind of bypassing all that problem, or is it potentially even adding new problems, kind of adding an additional person into the mix who's also kind of, you've kind of potentially got three people who think that they own the customer relationship in that scenario?
Yeah. If you're stuck on who owns something, then maybe it becomes a problem. If someone has to stand up and say, I'm the owner of the customer, we should all be. I mean, even in engineering, I love my engineers to be sitting for some time with the customer. But I think what makes it a hot take is there are going to be people who say, well, you're talking about taking the PM out of that environment where they can talk to the customer. And I don't think that's the goal. That field team member can actually facilitate easy connections with the customer. Because in our case at Quantum, you have CS team members who have probably 4 to 5 meetings with a customer per day. So in terms of like getting quick feedback on an idea you just had with your product team, it's like within the same day, we can go talk to a customer about a thing we just talked about on a previous meeting. And that person can pull in the PM, pull in the designer, pull in an engineer and say, hey, I've got my friends here. We're working on something to solve your problem. And I want you to hear an idea we've had and then just tell us what you think. Just talk to us.
So one kind of cliche that you get out there from certain quarters is that again, some of these people, the more operational people, the people that are doing the customer success or maybe even support teams that are talking to these people, pre-sales engineers, sales teams, all of these people that quite rightly are spending the vast majority of their time speaking to customers, trying to win deals, renew deals, maintain account health, all of that stuff. But that they're going to be very focused on, to some degree, sort of big topics, like there's a big thing that maybe a customer or group of customers needs, but also to some extent on minutiae as well, like things that aren't that important really, but they're very important to that one person that they're speaking to. And because they only manage a subset of accounts themselves potentially, that they're going to overweight things that matter to their accounts, even though obviously the product team, or at least in theory, are trying to sort of, build for the many. So do you feel that depending on the incentive plan, that there's maybe a risk that it forces people to talk about smaller things, or do you think that's something that can be kind of covered?
It's a risk for sure. So if I take a pre-sales engineer as our square member, and that pre-sales engineer is trying to win a big account right now, then the incentivizing there is to skew towards the things that this account needs right now. So there has to be a level of trust and understanding about what the future goal is of the work that we're doing. It's not just to serve the current state, but we're trying to move things for our entire customer base. And that's more like a cultural thing that you want to instill with your business, that I want to do the things that most often serve the masses of our customers, not just the next one up that wants to land a deal. And we have that trust for sure, but it is a risk. And I feel less risk in that area when I bring in someone from post sales who's got maybe 10 accounts, because they're thinking more holistically. It's like, I have to manage these relationships for the next 1 to 3 years with 10 different customers, and they all have their different needs. So they're thinking a level up and saying, what is the one thing I could do for them that would really move all 10 of my accounts in a great direction?
But there's another important element to this, which is kind of, I guess, related, but this idea that you kind of touched on it yourself, this idea that the people within this square, or two triangles, the conjoined, was from Silicon Valley, the conjoined triangles of success, right? But this idea that the team have to be basically super aligned, right? Because if they're not aligned, then either they're going to be having different conversations with the same customers when different people go and talk to them, or they're going to be kind of arguing amongst themselves, or people are going to be hearing different things, and it's just going to become a bit of a mess. And there's also then kind of a question about incentives as well, because you sit and say, okay, to your point about the pre-sales engineer, if the pre-sales engineer has a different incentive to the product team or the traditional trio, then again, it kind of it kind of makes things more complicated. So like, how have you found that works with regards to making sure that you actually have strong alignment between the members of that square and indeed across the company?
Yeah. I think someone might hear this hot take that I have and say, well, then what is a PM even doing? Like, are they just
Well, we'll get to that bit in a minute.
Yeah. Are they just a glorified project manager? But I think this is the reason that the PM exists within that square, is to make the group think strategically. How am I thinking beyond just this one customer we might be talking about for this problem? How does it move the business? I've heard you talk on previous recordings about big bets. If we have a big bet as a company, that's a thing much higher level than your one customer account that you're working with. And so how does that PM drive the strategic effort with that group and say, we don't want to get tied up in the things that you're talking about here, but we want to think strategically, how does this move the goalpost for the company?
All right, well, let's talk about PMs then, because,
Okay.
It's a very, let's call it, ill-defined role in many companies.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it's very, I'm sure it works very well at your place, and I'm sure it works very well at other places. I also know many places where it doesn't really work that well. And you touched on it yourself as well, this idea that like the PMs in some companies get kind of relegated to this kind of project manager role, writing tickets, passing tasks back and forth between quote unquote the business and engineers, and those two people definitely never meet, and it's just these people kind of almost kind of water carrying between the different teams in the organization that are doing the quote unquote real work.
Yeah.
So as far as you see it then, in your square model, what is the specific role of the PM, aside from the alignment stuff you just talked about, which is good, but also kind of fairly high level? But like, what are the specific things that you expect them to be doing to kind of help drive the product forward, like tasks that they might perform and such?
Yeah, I loosely call them kind of the quarterback of that product square. So typically that engineering, I want everyone to think holistically about the customer, of course, but that engineering leader is going to skew towards, let me build the right architecture that's going to be, cost effective. It's going to be performant. It's going to solve the right problem. Designer is going to be thinking more visually. How do I lay out information architecture? And then even the customer team is thinking about the customer and their problem, but they're not thinking about those other elements that I just mentioned. And I think only the PM can bring those people together, bring the right people together, and to take the bits and pieces and kind of facilitate some things between them. I love that you talked in the beginning about the square points don't connect, and I'm going to start drawing it as like an X in the middle there.
Oh, yeah, X in the middle, like
yeah, because there are magic connections that happen in there, like specifically thinking about the customer rep and the engineer. I've seen some just magical exchanges where the customer is talking about what the problem looks like and why that drives success for that person in that role at our customer or prospect. And then the engineer is like, I know how to connect this to the architectural things that I know to solve that problem that you just mentioned. There's this just back and forth going on between the two of them. But the PM is the one to put those pieces together. And there's an element of like documentation, project management. And I think people say often about PM, it's like, what does your organization need for product management? And you're going to have to like learn what that means and shift what you do. And some organizations are going to say, I need project management as part of what you do. Some are going to say, we'll give you a project manager and do it that way. But an interesting thing about the way business has been trending in the last couple of years is efficiency, cutting layers of things. And I think maybe that's driving some of the change around the PM role, because it's like, sometimes you're going to have to be, as the quarterback of the team, you're going to have to be saying, hey, did we get those JIRA tickets together? Hey, are we getting those designs in time? Field team member, I need you to be here and talk about if this thing we're talking about building right now is going to hit the needs of what you're hearing 40, 50 hours a week from our customers and prospects.
All right, well, let me ask you an even spicier question then about that then, because if we think about the 4 different types of people in that square with the X in, if you had to be efficient and cut one of them, who would you cut?
Wow. This is a really hot take now.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing who we can offend the most on this one.
Man, I mean, I I can't imagine cutting a point of the original product trio. And if I had to take a step back out of the square model, I would probably pull that field team member out. But then it just means that, hey, everyone else in the trio, we need more of your time
Yeah.
now. So back to the original reason I think we got to this square, I saw customer representation looked like, oh yeah, we did a couple of 15, 30-minute calls last week with the customer. And that was our research. We got these points of feedback, and I'm bringing it back to the trio, and I'm trying to turn that little bit of feedback I got into enough to drive a product that hits the mark. And that was not enough. But when it's like, well, why can't you spend 20 hours a week with the customer? Then all of a sudden you hear all the just tangible day-to-day things that people have to get done. And it's like, I don't have time. Or scheduling. It's like, well, yeah, if I get a hold of our account team, they can probably hook me up with them in the next 2 weeks. And I'm like, I love to move fast because I am an engineer by trade. And so it's like, can't wait 2 weeks to schedule time with our customers. And then we only get 30 minutes with them.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we all want to be able to make good decisions and make them as quickly as possible so we can, stay ahead of the competition. But there's also then a kind of another question then around this idea of like, I understand this whole point around like that there are people out there talking to customers all the time or prospective customers all the time. And we absolutely need to bring in their insights because they're invaluable. Like these people, as you say, they're the tip of the spear when it comes to actual customer contact. But you could argue kind of that they're not really part of the square in the sense that unless they're working with the sprint or whatever equivalent teams on a daily basis and kind of getting involved in specific planning and writing tickets and, like doing the cut and thrust of software development, that's really more of a coordination play. Like, for example, I always recommend that product teams, have regular catch-ups with the CS team so that they can start to bring back some of that feedback and start to sort of talk to them about the things that are going on and stuff. So is it more than just an alignment thing? Like, are these people actually working within the kind of the weekly or whatever cadence and the heartbeat of the development of the product?
They are. And I love that you asked it. That's what makes it, I think, a hotter take is we are asking customer team members and sales team members to spend a good chunk of their week with us. And we have a lot of them. So it's like, I might be asking 3 customer team members to spend, 30 minutes to an hour a day with our product teams every day of the week. But they are embedded in our product team. So they're attending stand-ups sometimes. They're seeing the early prototypes. They're clicking through things and saying, no, I don't think this part is going to work. That's what makes it magic. If it's just like another person you're interviewing, it's good. I could probably survive with the trio if I'm getting a regular touch point with our field team. But then it's like they're disconnected when we're not talking to them. And they kind of like swoop back in every few weeks. And it's like, hey, look at our newer version. And they're like, how'd you arrive at this thing, in the last 3 weeks? And it's because they weren't sitting there when we're having the conversation about what we're going to change along the way. There's so many decisions every day when they're there for more of them. Like it's all about trying to hit the mark without going back around as many times. I feel like the whole product effort the goal is to try to waste as little as possible. And the more you're adding these checkpoints, both in discovery and then execution, you're more likely to hit the mark without spending a whole bunch of extra time tearing things back down and redoing it.
All right. So super quick kind of lightning question here, because this could obviously be an entire podcast episode on its own, but I do have to ask you, like, if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, yeah, I might give it a go, see how it works. Like, what is the short version of how they would do that? Like, do they just go and just grab someone out of the cubicle, or like, is there like a process that you tend to go through? Like, what's the easiest way to get started and at least try this out?
The first thing I'll acknowledge is I'm talked a lot about B2B, obviously, because that's the world that I live in.
That's all I care about.
Yeah, there is definitely a way to do this in B2C. In fact, a product I love is Tonal. It's kind of like the workout machine on the wall with a lot of software attached to it. They reach out to me constantly. It'll be like right after I do a workout, they ping me and say, hey, we just saw you did a workout. Can we get 15 minutes with you to just hear about how we're solving your problem? So that can be done. And the step I would take is say, get buy-in from leadership. So I would go to my chief customer officer. I would go to my chief revenue officer and say, I need some of your team's time. And it might feel painful, the amount of time that I'm talking about, but the on the other side of that, the benefit is going to far outweigh the 5 or 6 hours I need from this person each week, because we're going to hit the mark for the customer. We're going to solve their problem better. And they're going to be just screaming about how amazing the job we're doing is. And that's what we saw when we switched to the squares. They were saying things like, something feels different about the product you're delivering now. It's like you're in our head and you know what we want and how we want it.
Well, there you go. That's a good reason to do it. Like, everyone wants to get those kind of testimonials back, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if people want to come and find you after this and find out more about either what you've talked about here, or maybe find out a little bit more about what your company does, where can they come and find you?
For sure, LinkedIn. I've been trying to kind of get my thoughts out there more and more, sort of like set a reminder for myself.
You and everyone else, huh?
Yeah, a couple times a week. Try not to overdo it. I'm not there posting 2 times a day, but it's just like things that hit me during the week. I try to write them down, and it really like spans a wide gamut of things, from how to work in executive leadership to architecture specific things in the engineering world to things like we're talking about in product process. I also landed a lot of the product cons. So, I land in San Francisco and New York and London to be there. So if you're in those areas and you're attending, I'll probably be there at a booth. I've got a streak going of speaking at a few of them in a row now. So yeah.
There you go. All right, well, I'll make sure to pop that all into show notes. Hopefully some people will come and check you out or connect and have a chat. But all I can do for now is thank you very much for your hot take.
Thanks, Jason. Love what you're out here doing.